Got the gavel. This is great. Welcome to the Hingham Zoning Board of Appeals. It is July 31st, 2018. 6 or 7 minutes after 7 p.m. The first and only item on our agenda this evening is Riverstone LLC off Ward Street. And the purpose of the meeting this evening is for deliberations and potential vote on a comprehensive permit under Mass General Laws, Chapter 40B, as amended to construct a 36-unit condominium development, including 9 affordable units on approximately 6.7 acres of land located in Residence District B, and the revised site layout plan dated April 25th, 2018 depicts 32 units. This meeting is a closed public hearing, meaning that we are not accepting questions or comments from members of the public or from the applicant or from anyone who walks in the door. The public record has been closed, and so in accordance with state procedure, we simply cannot accept questions or comments from members of the public. I will note that many of you have submitted your comments, thoughts, and suggestions over many months. We have read them, the staff has read them, and we greatly appreciate the thoughtfulness that you've shown, the issues that you've raised, some of which we had not really conceptualized as well as you folks had, so it was very important that we got your input. We believe that what you'll hear this evening reflects to a large extent the input that we've received from members of the public. So thank you very much for participating in this. But again, we are not in a position to take any further comments from the people here. I do not see any representative of the applicant here this evening. They are not required to be here. And they also know that if they were here, they could not participate. They could not raise comments, present comments. They couldn't present documents. So the record is closed in that regard. So with that.
Before we begin?
Yes.
I just wanted to reiterate your comments, thanking the public for their input in this process. It has been of immense help to us and to staff. You know, we all live in town. We've lived here for a while. We can't know everything. So thank you very much for that. So, agreed. Okay.
So now we begin our deliberation process. And when I say begin, we begin it for the purpose of this hearing. We have had ongoing discussions, as everyone knows. At each meeting, we've given due consideration to what the applicant has proposed, to what the other members of town boards have given us, to what our peer review folks have given us. We've talked in our public meetings among ourselves in terms of what our thoughts are. We have gone over in great detail our proposed conditions, our proposed waivers that we either will grant or deny or grant with certain limitations. And what I'd like to do this evening is go over only those portions of the conditions and the waivers which we're thinking of changing from where we last left them at the prior meeting. Otherwise, we may be here till a very late hour. And then we'll have a summary and sort of go over our major findings and make sure that all members of the board are in agreement, even though only a majority. Our goal is really to make sure that we've got input from each member of this panel. We are going to be referencing 3 documents when we go through this hearing. The first is the comprehensive permit project plans. These are the project plans, and we refer to them, and we will refer to them in the hearing this evening as Attachment A. And they are a list. Emily, do you want to just review for us what is on Attachment A so that we can save our breath here?
In general, these are plans, reports, studies, and other submissions that the applicant made to the board in connection with its application. So they include the application as revised, the most recent plan set as revised through April 25th overall, and 2 particular sheets through May 1st. There are several architectural plans referenced, the preliminary hydrologic analysis, some information related to the soil absorption system, including its sizing and ability to withstand the weight of a fire truck. Correspondence from Geoscience that was submitted in response to Board of Health comments. The traffic impact and access study, prepared in actually April of 2016, but revised on several occasions through response comments. There's a potential vernal pool analysis memo from Environmental Consulting and Restoration. The financial information that the board reviewed in May and June. And then there's a general all other submissions made on behalf, either by the applicant or on behalf of the applicant, by their legal counsel, engineering firm, hydrogeologist, their traffic consultant, or wetland scientist.
So, I mean, when I think of the plans, I typically start with item 1, which we have here, which are the plans entitled the Comprehensive Permit Application Plan, known as Riverstone of Hingham, prepared by McKenzie Engineering, originally dated October 7, 2015, and the final version, I believe, is revised through April 25th, 2018. That's 16 sheets, sheets C2 and C3, further revised through May 1st, 2018. And that is the plan set, and then there's 9 other documents which sort of build on that, but that is the core of the plan. So that's what we refer to as Attachment A, as the project plans. The second, and this is also thick, is what we refer to as Attachment B, and this is a list of the comprehensive permit conditions that this board has discussed at our prior hearing. We're going to review them to the extent that they reflect changes from what we previously discussed. And then finally, we have what I'll be referring to as Attachment C, which is a list of the requested waivers from local requirements and regulations that was submitted by the applicant, and then to the extent that we have agreed, or that we are considering agreeing to those requested waivers, or denying them, or modifying them in some way. So those, we really want to go through Attachments B and C to the extent that we need to address changes from what we've previously discussed, and then when we get to the findings, I think we can get to sort of the core issues that we have previously discussed, but I think can summarize and go over where we're at. So Attachment B. We have, Mario and Joe, we have before us both the original version and a version that highlights the changes from what we previously read into the record before. So I don't know if either of you would like to pick out any changes that you think are particularly important. I mean, so for example, we corrected the spelling of constriction vehicle to construction vehicle. That's really not going to be all that material.
May cause a constriction.
Could I just give like a one-sentence context?
Sure.
Just so, for recollection of everyone, including the board, on May 3rd is when the board went through the original draft. There were a number of comments the board made at the May 3rd meeting, which were incorporated. So what this is a red line based on all of the subsequent review of the record between May 3rd and when the hearing closed on June 26th.
Okay.
So just for context, those are changes. Some of them are just cleanup or rearranging or organizing, and some are kind of a substantive updating of them. Okay.
So I suggest we just go through the pages, and we're not going to read because we'll all lose our voices.
I just see on page 2 here on the general pre-construction conditions, item 3, we sort of clarified the additional restrictions on construction traffic, vehicles entering onto Viking Lane from or exiting from Viking Lane to Ward Street.
Right.
Until we've approved safety measures, until town has approved safety measures.
Right. So it would say, construction vehicles and delivery trucks shall additionally be prohibited from entering onto Viking Lane from or exiting Viking Lane to Ward Street, except to the extent that safety measures for egress are approved by the zoning administrator and the Hingham Police Department.
Should that say safety measures for access and egress? Since we're talking about accessing Viking as well here. I think
Yeah.
it means the same,
Okay.
but
I agree.
access and egress,
Yep.
sure.
Yep, I think that's
Okay.
fine.
Okay.
That's a good change.
Yep.
And at the bottom of there, we've added in, the applicant shall erect construction fencing along all property lines, and we added in, and along the tree line as defined in conditions C1B3. Emily, there is a note on page 4, A triple I.
Yep.
What is the issue that is there an issue that you think the board should further discuss?
No, just the connection,
Concerns the bay windows?
I'm sorry, okay, I thought we were.
Objection.
We're on page
Okay, yes,
4.
during the last hearing on June 26th, the board reviewed certain additional waivers that the applicant had submitted on May 16th. And during that discussion, we also noted in going through the marked-up plan that was prepared by Amory Engineers, that while the board had a condition related to separation between buildings, and the applicant had alleged that that condition would make the project uneconomic, when we really looked at the impacts, they seemed fairly minimal. And you had a bit of a
Right.
discussion about chimneys or bay windows. It seemed, based on your discussion, that modest changes could make the project comply with this condition. But the issue seemed to still be a little bit open. If the board cares to, that marked up plan is also in your packet or right underneath your plans, as are the architectural renderings. And so just to clarify that the information that the applicant put on the record in terms of their plans do not depict any chimney protrusion. So those do all appear to be bay windows.
Right.
Or, according to the floor plans, potentially valve rooms. And so it just didn't seem clear whether the board wanted to allow any of those types of protrusions within the 20-foot separation, or if they would also be subject to the 20.
When we say valve rooms, I think we're referring to valves pertinent to the fire suppression. I mean, these are multi-unit, so
Yeah.
these are going to have
Yeah,
sprinklers.
that would make sense, yep.
And I think that's probably where they put some of the master controls for that specific building.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I think part of our concern there was we had insufficient information from the applicant to determine whether or not allowing those bay windows to intrude into the setbacks would render the project economic from their perspective. And we were open to that discussion if they would give us the information so that we could further consider it. We don't have the information.
Well, on Plan A1, it shows a valve room and a bay window on the first floor. And a bedroom end unit, so, I mean, don't we have compressors for air conditioners coming in? They can't be in the setback,
Right.
so I think that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, it's a
So,
similar issue.
yeah.
It's a similar issue. The question is, should this board consider it if
Right.
in fact that would allow the project to be rendered not uneconomic, which is what the applicant's complaint is.
Right.
Well, Well, how about the provision in the bylaw which does allow certain projections,
Right.
not exceeding 30 square feet in area, and not adding usable floor space
Right,
into setbacks?
which for a
Yeah,
couple
like a,
reasons.
Valve room's
Stairway.
not really usable floor space. 'cause
stairway?
it would be-
But it has a foundation.
Right.
So, and same with the bay window. So if it were a bay window that just cantilevered out of
Right.
the wall,
It would be allowed.
it would be allowed to be located within a setback.
Right.
So it's, you might look to that as how to handle this situation, but technically this is a condition that the board crafted about separation between buildings, and it's not technically a setback issue.
Right.
It's a separation issue. So the condition originally was recommended by the planning board, and I think had support from neighbors and public safety departments, because it's allowing, it's just more light
So
and air, it's
it's come
controlling
up on a few
density.
units that they have, yeah.
Yep.
13 and 14, they got 18 because of a bay window. I mean, I don't think there's,
Yeah, it was, there were relatively few units that would be impacted, and those that would be impacted, it was just a couple feet. What we didn't hear was the analysis that the applicant had done as to what modifications they might be able to make to comply with the condition. We instead heard that they were chimneys. It just doesn't seem that what they have on the record would indicate that they
Yep.
are.
Do we have dimensions on the intrusion of a bay window? Like, how many feet it would, what's the depth of a bay
It was
window?
a 2-foot. So sometimes when it's two units
Right.
facing each other, that's 4 feet. So then the separation is just 16 feet between those portions of the buildings.
Right. So there's a couple questions. First, if it's the bay window that causes the problem, if they eliminated the bay window, they can then comply with our condition, and does presumably the elimination of the bay window makes the project cost less. On the other hand, they're gonna, there's a possibility that they may say that it would make it more difficult to have sales. They didn't give us the specifics, so we could weigh that and conduct the analysis. Susan, do you have a suggestion as to how we could impose a reasonable standard in light of this lack of information that we've got from the applicant?
Well, as Emily noted, the projection section on page 55 of the zoning bylaw only would kick in kind of as an as-of-right projection if we're talking about side, front, side, or rear yards. So this would, if the board wanted to consider allowing projections, you would need to craft it into this condition. Emily gave the example, if there's projections on both sides, they're gonna get even closer together. So, obviously the board's choices are just, it has to be 20 feet, period. You can allow projections up to a certain
Yeah, I mean,
amount.
I think if-
Or you can allow projections from one unit, but not both.
Exactly.
So, I think it's whatever the board feels would be appropriate for the intensity on the site.
Right. Mary, would you be amenable to allowing these projections?
yeah. I mean, it's only a few, so,
Yep.
I mean, if it's a foundation, that's,
That's, Joe, what's your?
16 feet.
A small number, I think, would be reasonable. I agree it shouldn't be on two buildings facing each other
Right.
to minimize the intrusions into that particular
Right.
space. So,
I would note, it might be a little bit difficult to word it because from a just from a standpoint of saying, well, you know, you can have them on half the units or 5 of the units, I guess, kind of, how do you pick what
Right.
doesn't appear to be an arbitrary number? The other thing is that if it says, okay, well, you can have projections up to whatever, 2 feet, 3 feet, but not on buildings facing each other, so long as it doesn't decrease the separation below X feet, then the buildings could be designed in a way, right, so that there's more floor space, and then there's always a projection. So I think it's something that could be gamed a little bit.
Right.
So I don't know that there's a perfect way to write it to avoid that risk. But if the board, wants to accommodate it, we'll make it work.
But on the other hand, I'd hate to put the town, who's ever going to be keeping tabs on this if it gets built, in the position of having to try and figure out if they're complying with this.
Right, the building commission will
Because
have to
it's-
decide.
Right, yeah, it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, he decides difficult issues all the time. I think he'd be capable of doing something like that.
Well, certainly capable, I just didn't want to place that extra work on him if we don't have to.
Right.
But-
So I'm thinking,
So, I
that-
mean, this conversation came up because our consultant and our peer review and our staff looked at this, and, I don't think, the applicant didn't come to us and say, well, it's gonna affect this building.
No.
We got this after he came back with it's unaffordable, so we did our due diligence to look at it.
Right.
And you look at the lines, we already talked about it.
Right.
And it's really, if you look at it, if he worked with us through the project, he might have been able to get something that looked something right, that could be built, actually.
Right.
After something was given him, but,
Yeah.
so my point is let's just stay with 20 feet and move on.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mara, when we're talking about it, I think, the more we're talking about it, the more I think we should just stay with 20 feet.
let me see.
I mean, everything he said was unaffordable, so.
Look, I'm gonna make a note to come back, but I think it may just be,
Yeah.
as a practical matter, difficult to
Right.
to draft that.
Right, okay.
The condition below there, we talked about, buildings along the Ward Street frontage oriented to present a front facade to Ward Street.
Right.
On page B5, the 2 means of access to the project, I'm assuming that's just been moved. It's
It's
not-
been relocated.
Right, okay. I'm up to B10 on vernal pools.
So, this was reworked a little bit, in part because of a submission we received from the applicant subsequent to the initially
Right.
drafted conditions, where they did provide, a study, so that we feel that they've already satisfied that.
Yep.
That's on number 2.
Yeah, okay.
And number 3, this is where you find the secondary access language
Yep.
relocated, so that, similar to what the board's done on prior projects, where there was a question whether someone would have the rights to do one thing, it's, if they do A, here's the conditions, but if they can't do A, here's the conditions to do B. So that's how it's been restructured.
I'm okay with that.
Yep.
Yep.
I'm on page B11, I'm not sure I understand, at the very bottom of the page, again, we're on the red line. It says this, design performance, a conversion of the existing autumn circle cul-de-sacs to a roundabout. The circulating area within the roundabout shall provide a 30-foot wide paved area with the inner circle designed to be traversable by the Hingham Fire Department design vehicle.
Yeah, so they use their largest fire truck
So that's
so that
known
somebody
as the
couldn't.
design vehicle?
Yeah, yep.
Here's sort of a point I have with some roundabouts in this truck apron, that's what you call that circle in the middle. In my view, it should be raised above, either just a few
sloped
inches.
granite curb.
So a truck can easily mount it to make the turn,
Cars aren't going to drive.
but it keeps cars from just cutting straight
Right.
through the rotary, which
Exactly.
defeats the whole purpose of the rotary, which is what happens at the Hingham Shipyard. I just saw 2 people do it just this evening. But, so I would rather have sloped granite curbing and constructed of, take out the word either, and/or a flat cobblestone.
I agree.
Agreed.
Because the whole point is to deflect you, to make you turn slow and make a slow turn to the right, to slow you down.
So it would say, and constructed of sloped granite curbing
Center,
center,
yeah.
constructed with a
Yeah, with a,
Sloped.
yeah, with a,
Instead of.
granite curbing center.
Yes.
Okay.
yeah. In accordance with, accepted highway design standards or whatever we want to say. So, there are standards for these things, so.
And then on page B12, we've made it explicit that if the project is not constructed within the Autumn Circle Access Road, the applicant shall revise the project plans prior to the application for building permit in order to provide a secondary means of access to the project. The secondary access shall be designed to the same safety and design standards as the internal roadways. Are there any additional limitations we would have on the secondary access? So, for example, any additional traffic studies that might be needed? If it's coming out at a different place?
Yep, this
Yeah.
would all be
Yeah.
peer-reviewed, and there are earlier conditions in the
Okay.
permit, A6
Okay.
and B6, that would require the board's reviewer.
Okay.
If they came back with it and the board determined that it was a substantial change,
Substantial change.
there would be a hearing, and
Okay.
it would be subject to all the
Okay.
full review.
Okay.
The changes on B13 for wastewater disposal were modifications that were requested for the Board of Health after May 3rd, but before June 26th.
Yep.
So that's where those came from.
They're pretty much things that we talked about
They're all things that we've
throughout.
talked about,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah. So this got deleted.
And so what's deleted there appears now on the prior page, so.
Yeah, it was just reorganized.
Right.
Yep.
I think that's it I have on with the conditions.
Yeah.
I just want to go back again to the one issue that we talked about, which is the separation distance increased to 20 feet. I don't want on an appeal this to come back to haunt us if there's a way that we can address what we think are relatively minor issues.
So what did do you remember what they proposed? What was their closest, was it like 5 feet or something? I mean,
Closest building?
Yeah,
No,
I'm
they,
trying to look
I think
here.
about 16 feet. They have
Yeah.
one spot where they mislabeled a separation at
One.
15 feet, but it was actually,
it says 15.6 or something.
yeah, but that was inaccurate.
It's 24, and then the
It's
two,
23.
Got 20?
bays.
We've got 23.
We got 23, but that looks like it's in the corner of the building to the rear wall. It doesn't include this.
It doesn't include the deck.
The deck,
So
okay.
the condition reads right now, so what the board had discussed was separation
Between the buildings.
between buildings as
Buildings.
opposed to
Yep.
accessory structures there
Got it.
too.
Got it.
And,
You're correct.
and they didn't really give a specific saying, well, this is gonna affect X number of units.
Right.
They just gave the same generic, the proposed condition would render the project uneconomic by significantly reducing the available units, which, as you can see from the layout,
Foot
all
off
it,
each building, you're not eliminating.
We don't really
building.
see that.
no, you're
Instead of it
maybe
being 50
taking,
feet long, it might be 48.
right.
So,
Or,
but,
yeah, just eliminate.
so
the-
I mean, I think we should either, lower the limit or just keep,
No, I mean,
just keep one limit. Whether it's 18, 16, 20 or whatever. It's not affecting. Are we counting decks? No?
We're not counting decks.
Right.
the projection, okay.
But, I mean, I guess to that point, if the concern is about
An obstruction.
access between
Yeah,
structures,
yeah.
the decks are
More of an,
they're
right,
more
right,
impactful.
right.
If it's more about massing.
Yeah, it's just the
The
feel,
two-story bay window is, it is
Right.
larger.
Right.
It has more bulk to it.
So if, I'm not sure I want to advocate this, but let me just throw it out, that if we change the language, say separation distances between buildings shall be increased to 20 feet, not including the projection of steps, gutters, bay windows, terraces, outside chimneys, stoops, piazzas, or porches not exceeding 30 square feet in area, eaves, cornices, windowsills, or belt courses, provided that no such items appear on the building to which this is to which the other building is fronting. So it can only be on one side.
Or, so that provided in no event shall the separation distance be less than 18 feet, or 16 feet, or something along those lines?
Well, I want to keep the 20 feet, except if you're talking about,
Those certain things.
Except
Yeah.
for the projections.
Right.
Provided that this exception. So, I mean, I don't think we care if there's one on both walls, as long as there's some certain distance
Right.
maintained.
well, if it's on both walls and it doesn't intrude in the 20 feet,
20, then
Yeah.
fine.
then that doesn't.
Right, won't
doesn't matter.
count, won't
Well,
count,
let
right.
me ask another question, though. Do you want to limit the square foot footprint of that? Because what if the projection, what if the wall,
30 square feet.
30 square feet, I'm sorry.
Yes.
No, only because he's modeling it after the projection.
Right.
Yeah, okay, no, that makes sense, because
Yeah.
you could have a projection that turns into actually an expansion.
No, this is capped at 30 square feet,
Okay,
which is what we do, which is what the
Yeah.
bylaw currently allows, but, the concept is, for
Stairs.
respect
you
to.
want to reread
So
that?
provided that no such projection shall
Have a
cause the
footprint?
separation
Oh.
to be less than X feet?
Should be, so in other words, you could do 1 foot on each side if you
Sure.
want.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, okay, to be
You want
less
to
than.
reread the whole change?
But if
18
we, let's think, so if we do that, are we going down the slippery slope, saying, well, we've just changed the 20 feet to 18 feet? and I don't want to go down that slope. I want to provide an exception that's clearly limited to these very modest projections.
Well, that's what,
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
Yeah, I think the
But
bylaw
is
language
30
kinda-
square
yeah.
feet is 10 by 3?
Right, it's not a
That
very,
is-
it's not a big
We can
deck.
do multiple.
But, okay, but if it's a 10-foot-long wall, they can come out 3 more feet, now your projection's 17 feet. Now your separation's
You can
17
actually call
feet.
that a
Then
projection.
it can be it can be no less than 18, is what we're saying.
Well, and so interestingly, the,
Big bay window.
Well,
if
how do
we-
you get to 30 square, then how do you get 30 square feet in there and still keep
I think
it?
30 square feet is for like
Oh,
a
we could-
porch or something, or front steps.
right.
For a landing, like a 6 by
Landing.
5
Yeah,
front step
exactly.
landing or
Yep.
something.
And the way the projections exception works in the bylaw anyways, is that it can't provide usable floor area to a
Right.
structure. So that actually would not allow what they've proposed, because they're showing the bay window as having floor area.
Right.
It has a foundation, it has 2 floors, actually, a second floor area.
Right.
It's not just something that,
It's not a projection out
Yeah.
from the wall, right?
Well, then that is beyond what I'm talking about.
Right, yeah.
I'm talking about a true projection where there is not floor area.
Mm-hmm.
So that means they've got to redesign it, and they want to take advantage of the beauty of the bay window.
Yeah, I have a bay window, but I had to frame it off.
Exactly.
So it's
Yeah,
not,
right.
my foundation doesn't
Right,
protrude
right.
out as the bay.
Right.
That's adding, that's the building, so
Yeah.
that's why I'm saying.
So, do you want to try to craft that language?
okay. I'm sorry, were you, I wasn't
wanna
looking.
reread
Yeah, okay. Separation distance shall be increased to,
Separating distance between buildings.
between buildings
Yeah.
shall be increased to 20 feet with the exception of the projection of steps, gutters, bay windows, terraces, outside chimneys, stoops, piazzas, or porches not exceeding 30 square feet in area, eaves, cornices, windowsills, or belt courses of the main structure or accessory buildings, provided that no such projection shall cause the separation between buildings to be less than 18 feet.
So where do we make it clear that the bay window does not have floor space associated with it?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So I need to go back to the bylaw.
Right.
Because that was, all right, so let's try it again. I'm gonna start from the beginning. Separation between buildings shall be increased to 20 feet with the exception of the projection of steps, gutters, bay windows, terraces, outside chimneys, stoops, piazzas, or porches not exceeding 30 square feet in area, eaves, cornices, windowsills, or belt courses of the main structure
Period, yep.
into the separation area, provided, however, that any device that supplies usable floor area to a structure shall not constitute a projection for the purpose of this condition, and further provided that no such projection shall cause the separation between buildings to be less than 18 feet.
Can I ask a question, where's this word device? I know this has been in the
I
bylaw
know.
forever,
I-
but it's a bad word, so
It
we
is.
should
Let's
do a
fix it.
better word.
Yeah, let's do a better word.
I think it should say that any
Such projection.
any projection that supplies usable floor area, oh, no.
No.
That any,
It's projection of, it's not defined in that bylaw, is it?
no,
No, just here.
just here.
It's a Webster's definition.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
How about any such element? Element?
Well, no such projection.
No, well, because you're using, shall not constitute a projection.
Oh.
Right.
So we have to call it something else. Element, building element?
Yeah,
You like building element?
Sure.
yeah. I think that works.
You okay with that, Joe?
Yeah.
Should not allow the separation to be less than,
Shall not cause
shall not.
such, cause the separation between buildings to be less than 18 feet.
Let's read that one more time. I know, this is fascinating.
You folks at home, too, I hope. It's great for can't sleep at night, you know, you can always watch this hearing, so. People come up to me all the time, they say, oh, I watch you on TV. I said, really?
Okay, let's,
Okay. So we've got separation distance between buildings shall be increased to 20 feet with the exception of the projection of steps, gutters, bay windows, terraces, outside chimneys, stoops, piazzas, or porches not exceeding 30 square feet in area, eaves, cornices, windowsills, or bell courses of the buildings into this separation area. Provided, however, that any building element that supplies usable floor area to a building shall not constitute a projection for the purpose of this condition, and further provided that no such projection shall cause the separation between buildings to be less than 18 feet.
shall not cause the separation between buildings, including the projections. You should say including.
Inclusive of the, yep.
Inclusive.
Inclusive of the projection.
And the way this is drafted, it's not clear to me if the 30 feet applies only to porches. Does it also apply to, this 30 square feet limitation, does it apply to the bay windows?
I think it applies to everything before the comma.
That's
So
ambiguous. So
that's
why-
how
let-
we've
Right,
interpreted
so
it?
let's make it
Right.
unambiguous.
Yep.
So,
Up to 30
How
square
about
feet.
a projection not exceeding 30 square
Yeah.
feet, so put it before the list?
Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
What is our basis for saying that it's okay to go to the 18 feet if it doesn't provide floor space, but it's not okay if it does provide floor space?
This is a whole massing intensity issue.
Right.
Yep.
And one of the issues that the board has raised during the course of the hearing was how there's such limited open areas within the
Right.
space.
It's
And
the plan,
that's
yeah.
one of the criteria under the regulations that the HAC would look at during an appeal is the lack of open areas on the site. It's
Right.
part of the intensity review.
Right.
So,
And I think fundamentally, something that is not part of the structure, but sort of projects out, has less of a massing.
Right.
And it's less intrusive. I mean, it's a judgment call that I think this board is capable of making. Yeah. Are you comfortable
Yeah,
with that?
I'm comfortable with that, I
comfortable.
mean,
Okay.
you know.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we have, with that change, concluded our review on the comprehensive permit conditions, and now,
I'm just gonna do a little, make sure we're all on the same page.
yep,
We have a change on page B2. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the clean one, so let me look at the marked up one. Yes, we still have a change on
B3.
B2.
yep,
We have the change on B4,
yep,
which we just discussed. There's a little cleanup on B7, there's just some shading I'll take out, but that's not substantive.
yeah, I saw that.
Bottom of B11, the granite sloped granite curbing center. And then, that may be it. And that is it. That is all I have, that the board has
That's all I see as
modified the
well.
proposed conditions.
Yes.
Okay.
Good. Okay. Attachment C.
Okay, can I just give the
Yes.
context?
Sure.
So, the board also reviewed a markup of the, or went through all of the requested waivers as of May 3rd, and made changes. Subsequent to that, the applicant, I believe on May 19th, 16th, came in and added a little bit to the waivers, modified them.
Right.
Those were added to the kind of the base document, all right?
Yep.
So the red line shows changes from after May 16th. So and they're primarily related to tying the waivers back to conditions.
Right.
And just putting better English around what the board's findings with respect to the waivers. So that's what the changes reflect as a general statement.
I see that in many cases, we've made it clear that when we've denied a waiver request, we've denied it because it's not required. So it's not as if we thought it was not reasonable or not, it simply was not required by this application.
Right, and we have a chart that the applicant had provided in the record in which they said, we agree this is not applicable.
Right.
So we've noted that,
Yep. Right.
that the applicant
Yep.
agreed on the record.
Yep.
Can I point one out to you, please? On page 4, this is one of the ones that came in subsequent when the board marked up, when the applicant marked up the board's response to the waivers. There was an agreement, like the applicant agreed that no waivers are required from special permits. But to the extent that the board looked to certain regulations and said, well, we're going to use this regulation as a guideline, they said, well, we still want it waived. And so the language that we crafted to explain, why the board was denying that is on page 4.
Right.
And it's new language you hadn't seen before, so just want to call it out.
So this is the comment beginning pursuant to Chapter 40B regulations. No waivers are required from special permit requirements of the zoning bylaw, and to the extent that the applicant has requested waivers from the provisions the board has relied on for guidance in crafting its conditions, such waivers as are, I'm assuming this is
Sorry,
it,
that
are
should be good.
denied.
I'm glad we're reading it.
Are denied as inappropriate blanket waivers, and to the extent such requirements are subject to express conditions of the comprehensive permit.
This comprehensive permit.
So that doesn't quite read right.
So they're denied as inappropriate waivers and denied to the extent these requirements that they're asking you to waive are the subject of, I
Okay,
guess.
so, and so it should
Yep.
say blanket waiver, and to the extent that, insert the word that such requirements are subject to express conditions of this
Yep.
comprehensive permit.
Okay,
And that's going forward on other ones. So this is basically subdivision, build out. So I was saying the same thing. So we put in requirements, RCP, and they wanted HDPE. Our action on this side wipes that out. They can't have waivers for any of that stuff, right?
right, so for example, one of the items that's specific, we know, is the reinforced concrete.
Right.
They didn't want to do reinforced concrete. Pat Brennan recommended at a board meeting that
Right.
it be reinforced.
Right.
So, that's a specific condition in the attachment B that you just reviewed. Okay, so the same board action is proposed
Right.
for the next one, so the same corrections need to be made.
And then,
How about one minor change on page 6, under board action, item 13.1? Review required under the State Wetland Protection Act,
Oh, no S.
official title.
Capital.
Yeah, Wetland Protection Act, yeah, singular
Yep.
wetland. Chapter 131, section 40.
Got it.
Do we want to reference the specific conditions?
For which one are we on?
sorry, right below that one, Joe. So 19.1, under performance standards for resource areas. We have in most parts of the table reference specific conditions.
Right.
This one instead references just general conditions related to the vernal pool. We could add in the specific ones, which include C1B.
Yep.
1 and 2, and C2, which are on pages B4 and B10 of the document you just reviewed.
Right, okay,
So we could say including,
Including without limitation, maybe.
Yep.
right, yep.
including without limitation. I'm sorry, Emily, would you repeat them?
C1, B, little 1, and little 2, and C2.
I'm just on page 8. Sometimes you're doing this and it seems like shorthand makes sense, but when you reread it, it's better to be clearer.
Right.
Yep.
So on page 8, where it says, but no waiver of fees are required, but no waiver is granted, I suggest that we add those words. No waiver is granted for fees for required conservation review under the
Yes.
State Wetland Protection Act. We'll fix that,
Yes.
Yeah.
Joe.
Yes.
But no waiver is granted.
And the same thing below that.
Yep.
Right.
That same comment applied to item 4 on page 10.
But no waiver is granted.
I have a question. I'm on page 11, the bottom permit restrictions.
Right.
So the requirement would be that the permit become void automatically if the work's is not completed within 12 months from the date of issuance of a permit. We're saying granted for a period of 3 years if construction authorized by the comprehensive permit has not begun in accordance with section 5605. What is that 5605?
So that's the lapse of permit provision.
Okay.
The only, I'll get the exact language, the only other thought I'm having while we're looking at it, but let me find this first. So if if construction authorized by a comprehensive permit has not begun within 3 years of the date on which the permit becomes final, except for good cause, the permit shall lapse. And it goes on. It says, that's all right, but I put in accordance with, because then there's additional language that if there's appeals, then the 3 years is
Right.
told. The only other thought is, I don't know, we have the Title V regs. I don't know if there is under the state, I don't know if, Joe, you know that, Joe Freeman, if you know, is there a lapsing for a Title V permit under the state?
At the top of my head, I do not know.
All right, well, that's something we
A
don't
lot
have
of
in
A
the
lot of
records.
times, DEP permits don't really, some permits don't have time restrictions on them.
We could say unless an earlier lapse applies under the state Title V regulations.
Right. Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's right. I want to make sure of that. I also want to make sure that we're not adding 3 years on top of the comprehensive permit
Right.
regulation. This is,
Right, well, that's why I was specifically referencing, so I could, but that can be made clearer if you don't feel that it's clear enough.
yeah,
Maybe granted for a period of 3 years in accordance with the regulations? Consistent with the regulations? So it's.
right.
if-
So
what
I
is
want to
the if
be
construction
consistent with the regs,
authorized?
but I'm not
Right.
giving them time beyond that.
Right.
Right.
So if you want to shrink it, we can just say,
I know that's the intent. I just
Yep.
want to make sure we're clear on that.
no, it can say something, okay. Well, maybe we can put granted subject to the provisions of 760. So it's we're granting relief from the automatically void, but it's subject to the provisions of 56.0512C,
But it should, no, it's granted, but it shall not exceed.
but shall not exceed.
It shall not exceed the periods otherwise provided in 760 CMR 5605 unless others.
Unless
state-
an earlier lapse.
Yeah.
Applies pursuant to applicable state Title V.
Or other state laws.
Well, this is only the septic system.
Right, oh, that's true. Yep, you're right.
Okay, so it's gonna say granted, I'm sorry, you said, not to exceed, but
Shall not exceed.
shall not, granted, but shall not exceed, I'm sorry, did you? I
So
started
what I'm saying is granted, but the, how do I say this?
shall not exceed the period provided for in 760 CMR? I think that's what you said. No, he didn't want to do subject to.
I'm saying granted, provided that what is the it that we're saying?
The it is, so, okay, so under local regulations, they get a separate wastewater
Right,
permit.
Right.
In this case, their wastewater permit is part and parcel of the comprehensive permit, so it's not a separate. So, I mean, the risk if, in waiving this, is that somehow you're now granting them more time
Right.
than the regulations would allow them.
Right.
So you don't want to waive it, in total. But you need to grant it to at least to the extent that they are provided a certain period of time under 12C.
So wouldn't that be subject to the provisions of?
so what you're saying is granted for such period of time as would otherwise be authorized.
Yep.
By 760 CMR 5605.
Okay, for such period
As
as
would
would
otherwise
otherwise
be authorized.
be authorized, under or pursuant to, what do you like better?
Okay.
Do you like under or pursuant to better?
Your choice.
Authorized pursuant to
Yeah, but
760
Other
CMR.
lawyers, we could take a poll, but I
Yeah.
can't do that right now.
Okay, granted for such period as would otherwise be authorized pursuant to 760 CMR 560512C, unless an earlier lapse applies pursuant to applicable state Title V regulations.
Would it be possible to somewhere in there say 3 years? Because that's helpful for, the enforcement folks who.
So if we said,
So you have to pull the rigs out.
But it may be longer than 3 years if there's
is it ever
appeals.
shorter?
It's never shorter.
Okay, so granted for a period of 3 years or such other period as would otherwise be authorized pursuant to
Good.
760 CMR 56.05.
Perfect.
I heard that.
Is this like watching glue dry?
Yes. Someone said, aren't you glad you're not a lawyer? I don't know who said it, though.
Can't believe it. Okay, so,
As they say, Shakespeare was right.
you have any more issues on this? Mario's gonna shoot me.
Could have said worse.
Yeah, true, I've heard worse. Okay, granted for 3 years or such other period as would be authorized pursuant, or maybe, or such other period as may be
As would-
authorized.
Right.
As may be. May
I would say for such other period as would otherwise be
otherwise,
authorized under.
okay. Authorized under, so he said he didn't care, but he
Pursuant,
does.
God,
That's okay, it says under now.
okay.
Unless an earlier lapse applies pursuant to applicable Title V regulations.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you have anything else on this?
Do that.
Do you? We don't. Okay. So my suggestion, I would like to take a 2-minute recess to go to the men's room. And then we can come back and vote.
Perfect.
Is that okay?
Oh, are we done with this document? Is that what we
Yeah,
were
yes,
saying? Oh,
yeah.
okay.
2 minutes.
doing that.
I do. Okay, we are resuming. So at this point, I want to make it clear that in connections with our deliberations this evening, the board has discussed and thoroughly reviewed the following three documents. First, the project plans described in what we call Attachment A. Second, the board's proposed comprehensive permit conditions as described in Attachment B. And third, a list of comprehensive permit waivers that were requested by the applicant, showing which waivers the board proposes to grant and which ones we propose to deny, all as described in a document we refer to as Attachment C. So at this point, I will entertain a motion that the Zoning Board of Appeals, after extensive public hearings and evaluation of the testimony and documents submitted by the applicant, neighbors, town officials, and peer review consultants, that we vote to make the following findings and to grant the comprehensive permit for the project shown on the project plans described in Attachment A, subject to the comprehensive permit conditions as described in Attachment B, and to grant certain comprehensive permit waivers and to deny certain comprehensive permit waivers, respectively, as expressly set forth in Attachment C, which findings and attachments are expressly incorporated into this vote by reference and are each deemed by the board to be an integral part of this comprehensive permit. The findings are as follows. First, the board undertook its review of the comprehensive permit application and is rendering this decision in a manner consistent with the following, collectively referred to as Chapter 40B, A, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40B, Sections 20 through 23, B, the regulations promulgated thereunder at 760 CMR, Section 56, a sequel, the 40B regulations, C, the Chapter 40B Handbook for Zoning Boards of Appeal, published March 2017, known as the 40B Handbook, and D, the case law interpreting all of the foregoing. 2, while there may be a regional need for low and moderate income housing, the project must be subject to appropriate conditions as identified in Attachment B, and several of the requested waivers must be denied in whole or in part as described in Attachment C because, A, the applicant repeatedly delayed or failed altogether to make timely submissions of materials consistent with 760 CMR Section 56.052, and in response to reasonable requests of the board that were consistent with its powers under 760 CMR Section 56.05, including requests pursuant to the local rules adopted by the board pursuant to 760 CMR Section 56.051, which requested submissions did not exceed those required by the rules and procedures of local boards for review under their respective jurisdictions, and which were necessary for the board to evaluate the consistency of requested waivers with local concerns. B, to the extent the board was able to review the project based on the limited submissions by the applicant, the record of the hearing demonstrates that the conditions imposed by the board and the waivers of local rules and regulations denied by the board are necessary to address local concerns, including the need to protect the health and safety of the occupants of the project and the residents of the town, to protect the natural environment, and to promote better site and building design in relation to the surrounding residential neighborhood. C, to the extent the applicant has alleged that one or more of the conditions and/or denied waiver requests render the project uneconomic, and such conditions and/or denied waiver requests are ultimately found by a court of final jurisdiction to be economic, such conditions and denied waiver requests are consistent with local needs, as the record of the hearing demonstrates that the imposition of such conditions and of applicable local requirements and regulations is reasonable in view of the regional needs, or the regional need for low and moderate income housing, considered with the number of low-income persons in the affected municipality and with local concerns, and as the board has applied the applicable local requirements and regulations in a manner either equal to or more liberal than they are applied to unsubsidized housing. And D, as of the date of the filing of this application, low or moderate income housing has existed in the town of Hingham which is in excess of 10% of the year-round housing units reported in the latest federal decennial census of the town, thereby meeting the standards for the statutory minima as set forth in the letter to the applicant dated May 12, 2016, from Attorney Kerry T. Ryan that was sent on behalf of the board. Third finding, without limiting the foregoing findings with respect to all conditions to be imposed by this comprehensive permit and the requested waivers denied by the board specifically finds as follows. A, with respect to conditions requiring submission of more detailed plans and reports and review of those plans and reports by the zoning administrator, by other appropriate town officials such as the building commissioner, or by the board's peer review engineers, such conditions are appropriate under Chapter 40B as the conditions merely require submission and approval of additional plans concerning issues that were not adequately addressed in the preliminary plans submitted with the applicant's comprehensive permit application and do not require further hearing and approval by the board. B, conditions requiring minimum setbacks from Ward Street, from abutting properties, and from retaining walls, and requiring minimum separation between units within the project, which required setbacks and separations are greater than those proposed by the applicant, but equal to or less than those required by applicable local zoning regulations, and the denial of the applicant's requested blanket waivers of local setback requirements. Such actions by the board are consistent with local needs because the record of the hearing demonstrates that the conditions address both the intensity on the site with respect to the height, bulk, and placement of the proposed project, the physical characteristics of the proposed project, the density of the site with respect to the lack of adequate setbacks and landscape buffers between the structures in the proposed project and the existing established neighborhoods, and the adequacy of open areas within the project site. C, conditions requiring that the width of internal roadways and sidewalks be greater than proposed by the applicant, and that additional sidewalks be constructed within the site are consistent with local needs because the record of the hearing, including testimony provided by the board's professional traffic engineer and the Hingham Fire Department, demonstrates that the applicant's proposed arrangements for dealing with the traffic circulation within the site are inadequate and do not meet recognized industry standards, with the result being that emergency vehicles and pedestrians would be unable to safely navigate the internal roadways as proposed. C, requiring two means of access to the project, including a condition that an alternative secondary access be provided if it is determined that the applicant has no legal right to access Autumn Circle over private property, are consistent with local needs because the record of the hearing, including testimony provided by the board's professional traffic engineer and Hingham's public safety departments, demonstrates that the occupants of the project cannot be adequately protected without a second means of access, and because a recent decision of the Massachusetts Land Court related to rights to access Autumn Circle that was submitted into the record of the board's hearing by parties to the pending land court case indicates that the applicant may not have a colorable claim to title in an asserted access easement, thereby raising an ownership or control issue which adversely and substantially affects the development of the proposed project, such that the board need not and cannot responsibly ignore the reality of the potential impacts on the project plans. E, conditions requiring off-site traffic mitigation to address impacts at the French, Ward, High Street intersection and on Autumn Circle, if it remains as the second means of access to the project, are consistent with local needs because they are necessary to mitigate identified and direct safety impacts that will be caused by the project due to the traffic that will be generated by the project on adjacent streets. F, conditions requiring compliance with the local wetlands bylaw provisions and regulations governing vernal pools, including without limitation Section 2C of the Hingham Wetlands Protection Bylaw and Section 19.1C of the Hingham Wetlands Regulations, and the denial of blanket waivers of such bylaw provisions and regulations are consistent with local needs, as a vernal pool has been confirmed on the project site by the board's peer review wetlands scientists through identification of vernal pool species and other recognized indicia of a vernal pool. G, conditions requiring partial compliance with local Board of Health supplementary rules and regulations for the disposal of sanitary sewage, including, without limitation, Section 6(8) thereof, to reduce the risk of nitrogen levels in nearby potable wells, and the denial of blanket waivers of such regulations are consistent with local needs because the record of the hearing demonstrates that, due to the proximity of several potable wells to the project site, compliance with state Title V standards alone is insufficient where the identified important local health concern, maintaining clean groundwater servicing local private wells, is not adequately protected by compliance with applicable state standards. Finding 4, while pursuant to to 760 CMR Section 56.056, the applicant submitted to the board its pro forma, purportedly revised to reflect the additional cost of meeting the board's proposed conditions and/or waiver denials, and which purports to demonstrate that certain conditions of the comprehensive permit render the project uneconomic, the applicant failed to provide sufficient information in such revised pro forma to substantiate such claims or to identify how specific conditions or denied waivers adversely affect the economics of the project. And therefore, the board was unable to make an informed determination as to whether it should consider modifying its originally proposed conditions and/or waiver denials, and if so, to determine which conditions or denials would be appropriate to modify, if any. 5th finding, waivers requested by the applicant which constitute blanket or plan waivers, A, are inconsistent with 760 CMR Section 56.057, as they fail to identify how such waivers are, quote, required to permit the construction and operation of the project, unquote. B, are strongly discouraged by the 40B handbook, which states that the board should only approve specific waivers. And C, fail to address local concerns identified in the record of the hearing. And our 6th finding, with respect to any condition in our comprehensive permit requiring compliance of the applicant and the project with specific provisions of Mass General laws, collectively referred to as state acts. The state acts are general laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and not local requirements or regulations. And therefore, the board has no authority under Chapter 40B to override the requirements of such state acts. So I began this by saying that I would entertain a motion that had these statements and conditions. Will someone propose such a motion?
So moved.
Is there a
It's a
second?
long motion.
It is. Do you want it reread?
No.
No.
Do you second that motion?
I'll second that motion.
It has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
No.
I'll take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
There are no opposed. It passes unanimously. This comprehensive permit proceeding is now concluded. Emily, do you have anything else on our agenda for this evening? I will then entertain a very short...
Just so everyone knows, the filing deadline for the decision is Monday.
This coming Monday?
Emily will be providing you with the full-blown decision. We'll get that to you before the end of the week,
Okay.
so
Okay?
that you can
Take a look.
proofread it.
Yes.
And then we will need your signature on Monday. Will you be around on
I
Monday?
will be around.
Okay.
Monday. I actually have jury duty Monday, but I will be around.
Okay.
Okay, so I will...
4:30.
I will accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Thank you.